So the Halt Fentanyl Act passed both the House and the Senate now. We understand it's awaiting the president's signature. So how do you see this legislation impacting Texans?
Well, as you know, fentanyl has been the leading cause of death for 18 to 45-year-olds. And we know where it comes from. The precursors come from China. They make their way to Mexico, and then they're made to look like innocuous pills. And I've been to probably 6 or 7 school districts where parents, grieving parents, have appeared talking about their child who was taking what they thought was something innocuous, but it kills them because it's a counterfeit pill laced with fentanyl. So one of the most important things is to schedule fentanyl as the dangerous drug it is, because it does have some legitimate uses, but only in the hands of professionals. And so passing that and permanently scheduling it as a Schedule I drug was important. So it seems like it should have been easier than it was, but we got it done.
So when it comes to one pill kills,
yes.
When it comes to that, how can the federal government further support the state level initiative?
Well, part of the problem has been that with open borders over the last 4 years, the cartels that feed off of this human misery and get rich by doing it they've just had a field day. And so part of this is interdiction, which is enforcement and border security. Part of it's raising the visibility of the issue and raising awareness, and that can happen at your kid's high school or for parents to discuss around the table, because the idea that you could just end up taking one pill and dying is pretty foreign to most kids. Most of them, if they thought that was possible, wouldn't do it in the first place. So I think it's a combination of things that will help us combat this scourge, but certainly it's up to Congress to make sure that everybody understands how dangerous this drug is, and to do more, as President Trump and Governor Abbott are doing, to stop it before it crosses the border.
I know you talked about the fact that, yes, I know, and I can't think of the statistics right off the top of my head, but the large number of people who have died over the last 4-8 years with fentanyl.
Yeah, I remember a couple of years ago, it was roughly 70,000 people. I think the numbers may be down just a little bit, but not a lot. And you know, think about how upset and how concerned and how focused the media and politicians would be on any other event, any other mass casualty event where that many people died in 1 year. Wars have started for less. And so to me, it's almost like we become desensitized to the threat, but certainly talking to these parents who've lost their kids that have been so full of life and such great potential is just beyond tragic, and certainly made an impression on me. So this is something else we can do to help, but it's going to take a lot of things happening at one time to make those numbers come down.
When you mentioned this desensitized to that. At the same time, is there it wouldn't happen to me, wouldn't happen to is there a level of uncomfortability thinking it could happen to your child? Is that sort of out of sight, out of mind?
Yeah, I think, most parents don't want to believe that their child would ever do something like this. But, growing up, you do, I'm speaking personally and otherwise, we do stupid things sometimes. And, but usually your mistakes aren't fatal. This is an example of where a mistake can be fatal. And I think just the seriousness of it needs to be imparted to our kids. And thank goodness most of the school districts in the Metroplex here are doing a much better job of identifying the risk and raising awareness. And so parents and their kids can have these conversations. And so hopefully more of them will say, no, I'm just not going to take that risk, not even once.
So Texas has a shortage of mental health, addiction treatment resources, which are vital in combating, substance use disorders. How does your policy agenda address these shortages, especially for rural communities?
Well, it's a chronic problem. One of the things that did come out of COVID was the advent or the greater use of telehealth. And so where you can talk to a mental health or other professional remotely online, it's not panacea. It doesn't deal with all issues, but it's I think better than just people not getting access to that in the first place. But going through COVID was really tough on a lot of adolescents. They were isolated. They weren't going to school. They weren't able to be around their peers, so some of this, I think, is an outgrowth of that the mental health crisis we had as a result of COVID-19. But again, it's something I just think we need greater public awareness of, so more of us, whether policymakers like me or parents or just friends, can influence behavior.
So when it comes to border security, with Texas being on the front lines, I mean, we're very familiar with this issue.
Yes.
So how does the Laken Riley Act address the challenges that are faced by law enforcement, border communities in the state?
Well, Laken Riley, of course, is a young woman who was abducted and killed by an illegal immigrant who never should have been in the country. And so her family was brave enough to tell her story so she could become the focus for this legislation. But primarily what it does is force the federal government to detain people who are here illegally who commit crimes. And in my case, what I made sure through an amendment that anybody who assaults a police officer would be one of those who would be detained. The Biden administration basically just had a program or a policy of catch and release, and there was no deterrent to people continuing to come across the border where they were given asylum or they were given parole, which is just a technical procedure which says you're free to stay in the country for up to 2 years and get a work permit. So there was no deterrent for people to keep coming. I think legal immigration has been one of the best things that's happened to our country. People coming here in an orderly, humane, and legal basis. But uncontrolled borders not only let people come in who are looking for a better life, we all kind of understand that, but also means criminals, people with transporting drugs. There's no distinction and no controls, and that has been a disaster.
So when it comes to your amendment that you mentioned, talking about detaining migrants who assault law enforcement officers, how do you think that is going to impact safety and security in these regions?
Well, we've seen some videos. I don't know, I'm trying to remember exactly where it was, somewhere in the Northeast where several migrants were so emboldened that they basically assaulted the police officers that were trying to arrest them or detain them. And in some parts of the country, not Texas, thank goodness, you can do that with virtual impunity, and you know you won't be detained, you know you won't go to jail, or if you go to jail, you'll get out quickly. And all of this, I think, has to do with a sense that we have kind of lost control in our country of our communities and of public order. And I think President Trump and the voters in particular have made a big change of direction on November the 5th and said, we're not going to stand for that anymore. And I think this is part of that process.
There was a survey that was released, I think it was just this week, that talked about how border security was the top issue for a lot of voters in November.
Yeah.
Now it's moved down to like number 4 or 5.
Well, I think that's, you remember that inflation was also one of the top issues. We had 40-year high inflation, and of course we're still living with the incredible increase in costs and decrease in standard of living of regular hardworking Texans, people on fixed income. And but the border, President Trump has shown that enforcement actually works. And one of the things that I think the Biden administration lost sight of was the deterrent effect of enforcement. In other words, why would somebody turn themselves over to a coyote, a criminal, to transport them into the United States for $10,000 a head or whatever the amount was, if they knew they were likely to be unsuccessful? So fewer people are coming. I was reading in the last day or two, there's been a significant number of people who self-deported, anticipating that they might be the next on Tom Homan's list. But so far, Mr. Homan, the border czar, they've been deporting people with criminal records, but there are also 1.7 million people under final orders of deportation. In other words, they've had their day in court, they've had due process, and they've lost their argument for asylum, and but they remain in the country. I think those will be sort of the next category of people to be returned to their home country. And again, I think it's important for deterrence to control the border because of some of the bad things that happen, bad things that come across, and hopefully restore some order and some controls out of chaos.
Do you think there is some, confusion out there on who is being deported?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
why do you think there's that confusion?
Well, forgive me, but the press,
I figured you were going to.
the press
yeah.
tends to focus on the most sympathetic story, and certainly among all the many thousands of people who are involved here, there are some that sort of tug at your heartstrings. But the fact is, we can't govern by exception. We have to govern by a rule of law, and again, there are some provisions even under our law for hardship exceptions, but as you know, in the 4 years of the Biden administration, they just simply, this wasn't a priority for them, and they thought they were going to get away with it. And as a consequence, millions upon millions of new people came into the country, and unfortunately there were a significant number of really bad people who weren't here for bad purposes, and I think we paid the consequences. And the voters on November the 5th said, we're done with that. It's over. And President Trump, of course, ran on that.
So when it comes to the argument about stricter border policies, I think one of the arguments I've heard is that, well, now we're going to see an issue when it comes to sectors like agriculture and trade. You know, do you agree with that? And if you do, are there provisions that are kind of being talked about as far as?
Well, we're not, America is sort of turning into Europe in the sense that we're not replacing ourselves. People are waiting longer to get married, or maybe to have kids, or maybe don't have kids. So definitely the population is shrinking, so you have to look for some labor supply. And certainly, like where we're seeing it the most acutely is in the agriculture sector. A lot of these are hard work, hard jobs that people with college educations and the like don't really want to perform. But historically, what happens is immigrants come to the United States, they start on the bottom rung of the ladder, and then they work their way up. They do jobs that maybe most Americans would not want to do, but then they eventually work their way up, and maybe they end up bussing tables at a restaurant, and then 10 years from now they may be the manager of the restaurant, and 20 years they may own 5 restaurants. So that's been the normal progression of immigrants in our country. But yes, I think you're going to see some temporary dislocations in the labor market. And I hear this a lot from folks, whether they're the home builders or in the ag sector. And there are a number of them, but those are the ones that are particularly affected.
And I'm speaking specifically because, a lot of people do get their news on TikTok, and they get their news on social media. So you see videos that are shown around of, oh, look, this place is empty because, they've made a claim about deportation. And so that's why I asked that question.
Well, TikTok, is owned by
yes.
ByteDance, I think it's called, which is a Chinese company. So they're collecting your data. It's like having a spy on your phone, but they're also engaged in propaganda. But I know they're not the only social media platform. And, people are free to express their opinions and sometimes spread disinformation and propaganda. So I get it. I understand why some people are a little confused about what's happening. But that's the reason why conversations like this are important.
And that's why I asked the question. Okay, so with border security being a shared responsibility, let's talk about your perspective on how to balance federal and state efforts with the burden being disproportionately put on Texas when it comes to what's been happening over the course of many years. With us paying, it seems like quite a bit of cost.
Yeah.
We've talked about the federal government reimbursement, and tell me how that's going to work.
Well, Governor Abbott has asked me and the rest of the Texas delegation to pursue reimbursement for about $11.1 billion, which is what the state government and state taxpayers have paid to do what is essentially a federal government job. international borders are a federal responsibility, and the Biden administration dropped the ball completely on that, and I credit Governor Abbott and Operation Lone Star and the rest of the Texas leadership for filling that gap the best they could. They didn't have all the tools that federal officers would have because under federal law, only federal officers can deal with immigration issues, but they could deal with some of the law enforcement issues and could help. So we are working now through the process of getting Texas reimbursed. I'm very optimistic we will, and to me it's only fair that since this burden was borne solely, maybe disproportionately at least, by the state of Texas taxpayers to have the federal government reimburse the state. I'm sure the state can use that money for other purposes, whether it's education or other services, or maybe they can just give the taxpayers a rebate.
I've been hearing about that. Some numbers being thrown around. Speaking of that, I have to ask you about DOGE. I mean, I feel like I see something new every single day in regards to whether it's different money that is being unearthed or talked about, jobs being cut, layoffs, that sort of a thing. What is the number one thing you're hearing from people in Texas in regards to DOGE? I'm sure you're getting calls.
Well, I mean, you hear people who are affected negatively, maybe downsizing some federal jobs and federal agencies. But I think by and large, people are excited that finally there's somebody who's identifying some of the most outrageous and egregious examples of misspent federal taxpayer money. And what's so interesting in this discussion, on the other side of the aisle, you don't hear a lot of sympathy for trying to cut out some of this outrageous expenditure of tax dollars. Basically, I hear my Democratic friends saying, no, you can't do that. You can't change a thing. It seems to me that common sense would dictate that you would say, well, let's try to figure out what the outrageous expenditures are and eliminate those while not disrupting other beneficial purposes. But certainly there's going to be some dislocation. My hope is it's going to be temporary, and sometimes when there's been cuts, then they've come back and rehired those people, and so clearly there's been some collateral damage there. But my hope is in the near term this thing will work out for the best. USAID is a good example. This is a foreign aid function of the federal government, but some of the money that was being spent was for very woke special interest, or just misspent and with no real accountability. But there's some programs. One of the ones I think is one of the most significant was the PEPFAR program. This was a program started under George W. Bush's administration to provide generic antiviral drugs to patients with HIV/AIDS. I was in Africa in August, went to one of these clinics. It used to be that a mother, if she had HIV, she would transmit that to her child. And now, because the viral load is being reduced as a result of these low-cost drugs that they take on a daily basis, that doesn't happen anymore. So they have hope, and it's also what's sometimes referred to as the exercise of soft power. China and Russia are all over the place in Africa. This is one of the biggest, most populous continents in the world, and they are having a lot of babies, and they're growing fast, and there's a lot of growing pains associated with it. So having America there in a positive way, having an influence, is what's sometimes referred to as soft power. Plus, to me, it just seems like the right thing to do to try to help if we can. But that's an example of a good program, in my view, of USAID, as contrasted with some of the crazy spending that we've heard.
Do you think as things move on, and you mentioned, I guess you could say things kind of settle now, everything sort of settles, and people who maybe were let go or rehired, that sort of a thing, that there'll be more agreement from both sides? Because I do think people are surprised that this seems like something that could be agreed upon when it comes to, trimming the federal budget and that sort of a thing?
Well, I think you have a basic conflict between the political parties. I like to call the Democratic Party the party of government, and I think Republicans tend to be more local control, individual liberty and freedom, free enterprise, and so there's some people who just believe that the government ought to do more and more and more in our lives, but that doesn't come without a cost. So I do think that, and I certainly believe that there's a lot of bloat and unnecessary expenditures, including hiring federal workers, that we can cut. Plus, here's really what gets down to the essence of this. We now have $36 trillion in debt. That's more money than you and I can even imagine. But that's happened over years and accumulated over a number of years. And that's been because government has grown bigger and bigger and bigger and gotten more and more expensive. But now we're paying more money on interest on the national debt than we are to defend the nation. That's unsustainable, and it's dangerous in a very dangerous world.
And in this situation, while the DOGE cuts, I understand, are significant sounding, it seems like there has to be potentially a bigger cuts that will have to be made down the line to get us out of this spending when it comes to
I think
just on.
DOGE is just, to me, just sort of the beginning. The federal government spends about $6.7 trillion a year. Again, you can't conceive of that, I can't either. But Congress appropriates only about 28%. The rest of it's on autopilot. So Congress needs to go back and look at that mandatory spending, sometimes it's called tax expenditures, and look at it and see, is this still a priority? And I suspect, and matter of fact I know, there's a lot of things that the federal government's spending money on that we could cut, that we would never notice the cut because a lot of it's just frankly wasted. And the other part of it is we just can't afford to move down this road. People my age are not going to pay the bills. People your age and beyond are the ones that are going to have to cash the checks that we're writing today. To me, that's fundamentally immoral. And we've talked a good game for a long time, but haven't really done much about it. But I think given the sort of the unique nature of Donald Trump and DOGE and awareness of this, I think we're sort of at to me, a generational opportunity to actually do some meaningful things to bend that curve when it comes to the debt, to right-size the federal government, and to restore the liberty and and frankly unleash the economy that comes from a smaller, more efficient government.
I heard something from someone the other day that says, there just feels like there's a lot of uncertainty right now. What would you tell people out there that feel uncertain, unsettled at this point?
Well, they're right. There is some uncertainty now. I'd tell them, put down your phone, turn off the TV, read a good book, or go for a walk. There's a lot of things that seem like they conspire to drive us crazy these days, and I'm as guilty as anybody else. You get these algorithms that sort of addict you to your phone, and what I really worry about is when it comes to adolescents, our kids. Yeah, I mean, it does seem like there's a lot conspiring to put us on edge and make us anxious, but I think we can do a little bit of that ourselves in terms of the way we expose ourselves to some of this unnecessary stimulus in our lives. But I think also just trying to understand from a variety of sources what's actually happening, because it's hard. As you said, you can look at your TikTok or whatever and get one impression. You look at another news source, maybe even another social media platform, and you get another impression entirely. So what I try to do is get a variety of sources of information so that I can then try to figure out what's true and what's not true, and that makes me less anxious.
Well, I do the same thing. So from a journalist, that's what you have to do. Well, thank you for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Great to see you.
Nice to see you.